What if I told you there's a way to understand and unpack the basics of every conflict that's happening across the very complex Middle East? A set of principles rarely talked about by people in countries in Europe or the United States. Absent from the discussions in the big podcast studios, ignored by the experts on the panels of TV channels like the BBC and CNN, non-existent in the minds of the idealistic protesters across campuses in the United States. Well, it turns out that such a manual or playbook for the Middle East does indeed exist, and it comprises 4 major fault lines along which all the conflicts in the region are raging. And I'm going to share those with you here today. Can you guess them all? One of them, 2 of them, or none of them? Well, you're about to find out. But first of all, I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. We are talking about social sciences, not hard science. We do not have E is worth MC squared when talking about geopolitics. So no theory is absolutely complete, and there also will be other issues that come into play here. So I will say that, but still that I do believe this will really help you to understand most of the issues that are going on. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's go with the 5 major fault lines along which conflicts in the Middle East are raging. And the first one may be quite intuitive to you, and that is religion. But actually, religion might not be one of the major roles that are being played here. Why? Because most of the Middle East at this point is Muslim. So if we're talking about interreligious conflict, the main example is the one that I've talked about quite often on my channel, which is the Israeli Arab conflict or Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is Jews versus Muslims, also against the various Arab states earlier in its history, and now it also includes battles against Iran, Hezbollah, and so forth. So that's Jews versus Muslims. And if we look a little bit further afield, on the outskirts of the Middle East, we have Azerbaijan and Armenia, which is a Muslim country versus a Christian country. And internally, stability-wise, then the only country in the region that has a very large Christian minority at this point is Lebanon, and there you have internal instability because of the conflicts between Christians and Muslims in Lebanon, including in the Lebanese Civil War, where they actually slaughtered each other on multiple occasions. But if I mention Lebanon, then you may point out that Lebanon comprises 3 major groups, and that I'm missing something here because not all Muslims are the same. And I would say you're 100% correct, and that brings me to the second major fault line in the Middle East, which is sectarianism. Inside Islam, as many people know, there are 2 major groups, Sunni versus Shia. And in Lebanon, indeed, 3 major groups, which is the Maronite Christians, the Sunni, and the Shia, who, because of their differences, have difficulty forming a stable government over there. If you look at the larger picture in the Middle East, the main Sunni-Shia rift, which has been going on, by the way, for over 1,000 years at this point, is between Saudi Arabia, which is Sunni, and Iran, which is Shia. So that sectarianism is indeed a major rift. And there's also a third sectarian group that's small but played its role in the region, which is the Alawites, the Assad family that ruled Syria for half a century, that was recently booted out, came from the Alawite sect, and that was also a source of a difficulty of him gaining legitimacy inside Syria, which is mostly Sunni Arab. So there you go, sectarianism, major fault line in the Middle East. If we were talking about Saudi Arabia and Iran earlier, then you might point out that there's another big difference between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and I would say again that you are correct, and that is ethnic division. So we had religious, sectarian, and now ethnic division. Iran is Persian, Saudi Arabia is Arab, and those are 2 different ethnic groups. I would say the main hallmark of an ethnic group is the language, the difference in language, Persian speakers versus Arab speakers. If we look at other examples in the Middle East, then you have in Iraq, Kurds who speak Kurdish, and there's that autonomous zone in northern Iraq of the Kurds who are in conflict with the Arabs in the south. The Kurds are also in conflict or struggling with their independence bid with the Turks in the north, right? The Turks, again, another different ethnic group, different language. We have Armenian minorities across the Middle East as well. Inside Iran, you have various ethnic minorities like Arabs in Western Iran, in Khuzestan, who are both Sunni and Arab, which is a source of instability inside that country. So a lot of different examples of different ethnic groups, and that ethnic divide is again another major source of instability in the region. So we come to our fourth source of instability, fourth fault line, and this may be the least intuitive for people coming from the Western world, where we have these liberal democracies and nation states, and that is the tribal division. Tribal division. Now, what is a tribe in the Middle East? You hear the word tribe, maybe the first association that you have is primitive. You think of a bunch of people not wearing clothes, in a jungle going on a hunt and spearing a boar. But that's not what I mean by tribal. Tribal is a social construct, a way of running a society around a ruling family and its subsidiaries, or a cluster of families known as a tribe. And this has been the social construct of the Middle East for many, many generations. And in many cases, you may look at countries that fulfill all of the, let's say, non-existence of fault lines that we talked about earlier, yet are still embroiled in serious conflict. Like one example is Libya in North Africa, that they're almost all Arab, although there are some Amazigh people there, Muslim and Sunni, yet when the dictator was kicked out, Muammar Gaddafi, they descended into a major civil war. So what was the civil war about? I would say mainly tribal warfare. You had different tribes with different groups that were all fighting each other and are still fighting each other to this very day. On the other hand, the absence of multiple tribes is a source of stability. So if you look at some of the Gulf states, places like Qatar and Kuwait, they're all Muslim, they're all Sunni, they're all Arab, and the state is essentially one tribe. That's why they're very small in number. It's one tribe with a ruler, so everyone is part of that structure. They believe in the ruler, and they're not fighting each other. Another very interesting example of the lack of tribal warfare is in the United Arab Emirates, where it's not one tribe, it's 7 tribes, but all those tribes, each one has its own emirate. So in this way, they have their own autonomy and they cooperate on more national things like security and foreign policy. And in this way, also the tribal conflict is taken out of the picture, and they're able to have a very functioning, stable, successful state. Another example, Saudi Arabia, racked by tribal warfare for many, many years. The whole story of the Prophet Muhammad is a story of a lot of tribal warfare that was going on there between different groups. More recently, you had the Saud family fighting the Hashemite family, and eventually the Hashemite family fled to Jordan. Afterwards, the Saudi family, Ibn Saud, consolidated control over all Saudi Arabia, and now it's called Saudi Arabia, not just Arabia, but Saudi Arabia after the ruling family. So there's one ruling family there, consolidated control, and the tribal warfare has been taken out of the equation. So we see that when these fault lines are absent, you have stability. When a lot of these fault lines exist, you have instability. Look at the map of Iraq. This is the map that you see on your globe that you learned in school. But this is the real map of Iraq. The map of Iraq that shows all of the tribes and what territories they control. That map is as relevant as any border map that you'll see in Europe of a bunch of small states. Those borders are quite real for the people who are there and who controls what. Iraq also has, of course, all the other ailments of Sunni versus Shia in the west and the eastern parts, of the ethnic division with the Kurds in the north. So it's a country racked by a lot of instability. Let's take some other case studies. And I'm just riffing here off the top of my head. I don't have a script in front of me. This is all from my memory. Yemen. Conflict in Yemen. You've probably heard about it, right? What's the conflict? You have a Sunni group, a Sunni monarchy backed by Saudi Arabia versus a Shia group, the Houthis, backed by Iran. If you look in Syria, now the Assad family was kicked out. You have a new dictator there. He's a Sunni Arab. And you see that the other groups that are now concerned, because there's this fragmentation that's going on, it's going on very much along the lines of these divides. You have the Kurds in the north. You have the Druze, which is its own, either you can call it a Muslim sect or its own religion, in the south. All of those divisions are coming to a head, and the new leader is struggling to maintain control of the territory. Lebanon, we talked about the divides. Israel, inside Israel, the main source of instability is the Arab Muslim minority, as opposed to the Jewish majority, because they belong to essentially a different group, to the Arab and Muslim world, the Arab ethnic group and the Muslim religion, and therefore are kind of more part of historically the enemies of Israel, and therefore a potential source of instability inside Israel. Talking about the Palestinians, also there is a lot of tribal divides, very rarely talked about in the media. Gaza is like divided between 6 major tribes who control different parts of the Gaza Strip. You have some of the same problems in the West Bank, which makes it hard for them to consolidate a proper kind of representative government to push the national agenda of the Palestinians. So it exists there as well. And also in a lot of other different countries in the Middle East. Every country, you can start to unpack these fault lines and you find serious sources of instability that maybe could be overcome in kind of like Western democratic liberal countries. But in these countries, it's a very different story. Even Iran, which we think of as like the Persian Shia Muslim country, is only like 50% Persian Shia. They have huge Arab minorities, Sunni minorities in the West. There's the Azerbaijanis in the Northwest, more Azerbaijanis, quote, than in the country of Azerbaijan, which I visited on my travels, who have a different ethnic identity, right, different language, even though they're Shia Muslim. You have the Baluchis, you have the Zoroastrians, you have Armenians, tons and tons of minorities who the state is not like representing them, and it's a source of potential instability. So the thing is, one of the reasons why I feel the need to talk about these fault lines is to highlight some of the other issues that are so commonly talked about in discussions in places like the United States, while this major source of conflict and instability is ignored. So if they're not talking enough about religion, sectarianism, ethnic, and tribal divisions, what are they talking about on Joe Rogan or in CNN and so forth? In the United States, the number one thing that they talk about, which is not surprising because we as people like to focus on ourselves, is American intervention, how American intervention has caused all the instability in the Middle East, how it's all about America, how America should do this or should do that. And, you know, I'd say, of course, America's played its role, particularly in Iraq when they invaded Iraq in 2003. But, you know, that was 20 plus years ago, and Iraq is still a complete mess. You know, the war's over. So is that all just like the remains, the vestiges of the invasion? Or is it because after the dictator Saddam Hussein was taken down that all the different divisions inside the country that I just mentioned are incapable of forming a stable government? Or that, you know, in the vacuum, a group like ISIS can rise because, again, there isn't enough cohesion due to the various divides. A lot of people talked about American intervention in Syria and what a big role it played, even though there was a gazillion different things going on there in the civil war. You had the Iranians who were backing the Assad family, and with Hezbollah, you had the Kurds in the north, you had a bunch of different Sunni Islamic groups, you had the Druze, there was like so much going on, and in the US they focused like insanely about the role, whatever, that the United States played. So I would say American intervention is one that is talked about endlessly, and you know, plays its role, but I don't think plays as big a role as the things that I talked about earlier. You have this talk about colonialism, the impact of colonialism historically, how it effed up the Middle East, and how, you know, foreign powers have their interest in oil and things like that. And again, it's like, okay, yeah, played its role. I would say that the main role colonialism played is helping to draw borders inside which those divisions that I talked about exist, and thus kind of like fading to push people together that have a hard time being together. Another big one is Zionism, how Zionism was this foreign implant. You know, Jewish self-determination movement was pushed there by Balfour and whatever, and created this huge division in the Middle East. And it's like, okay, again, so many of these conflicts that I talked about, you know, Yemen and Iraq and in Iran and Turkey and the Kurds, has nothing to do with Israel. It doesn't, that model doesn't explain everything that's going on. So American interventionism, colonialism, Zionism, I don't know, capital, greed, whatever, propping up dictators when, usually you have the option between a stable dictatorship or an unstable mixed mash of all the fault lines that we talked about. These are all the things, some of the things that they talk about a lot on US college campuses and the podcasts and so forth, that I feel like are really, really lacking in understanding the basic fault lines along which all of the conflicts are raging and which explain the basics of all the conflicts that are raging. And again, these other things play a role. Like I said, no theory is perfect. My theory isn't my theory. It's one that's kind of well known among a lot of different scholars, but not talked about, is not perfect, but it better explains everything that's going on than some of these other things that are talked about. Religious fundamentalism, another big lens, right? Islamic fundamentalism, groups like ISIS and so forth, again, play a big role, but doesn't always explain the conflicts between the different groups. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. If you disagree with this explanation, hypothesis, you're welcome to start a discussion in the comments below. If one of the examples that I gave is wrong in your opinion, you're also welcome to correct me or to start a conversation regarding these issues in specific countries. I do hope that this will open the mind for some people to explore these fault lines more thoroughly and see how in countries where the more of these various fault lines, religious, sectarian, ethnic, and tribal exist, the more unstable the country is, and the less of these fault lines exist, the more stable the country is, that you might reach some conclusions. So yeah, that's all I have for you in this video. For those who know me, I've been doing travel vlogs for 2 years. I'm now going into some of these more analytical videos because I used to talk about them a lot in my travels. So if you like this type of analytical video, let me know so I can keep making more of them. That's all for this time around. See you around, guys.